didn't shoot too much video yesterday or the day before because I've spent a lot of time on monotonous tasks which you've seen before, so I wasn't that inspired to take video. So basically I removed the cap rail from the starboard side yesterday, and again I've already shot some video of that, so I didn't repeat that. And I also pulled up all the caulking on the teak deck in preparation to planing that off. So the cap rail came off quite easily, a lot better than it did when I tried up on the port side. This time I really applied a lot of heat. I used the heat gun for every screw, and I didn't have as many issues with screws not coming out. I didn't have to drill any out here, which was good. I have struck a problem with some of the bolts that actually go through the hull. There's one bolt holding the cleat on the rear quarter that's not coming off, so I spent about an hour and a half trying to get that off yesterday, and I had to leave it, so that's something that I'll have to come back to, and I guess ultimately I might need to drill it out. So I'm just about ready to get the planer out and start on this deck. I'll just give you a view of what I've done so far. Okay, so here's the cap rail removed, as you can see, pretty much all the way back, and the caulking's come up from the deck. All the screws have been removed. I've just put a little bit of tape on that cabin side there to prevent the planer from making any scratches to the gel coat, because I want to try and get the planer nice and flush alongside that. I've had to be really careful to make sure there's no screws left or any metal, because I don't want anything going into the planer that will damage the blades. So I've just sort of done 2 or 3 inspections. I've vacuumed it up a couple of times to make sure that there's nothing lying on deck, nothing hiding any of these screw holes, and just been really methodical in going through and making sure that wherever there is likely to be a screw because of the pattern, that screw's been removed, and also looking for screws in random places that I wouldn't expect. So hopefully I've been thorough and careful and covered all bases. Okay, that's the cleat that I can't get out, and that screw in the top right hand corner there is the one that's not coming out. It's on an angle and it comes through into a cabinet in the aft cabin below. So I'm going to have a little bit of a break now, and then I'll start on this. It's obviously going to be a big job. So what we're looking at here is the remains of my teak deck after I just removed it. Or rather, this is probably about 70% of the teak deck, because I haven't exactly kept all of the pieces of the teak deck as I've been breaking it up along the way. So what we're looking at here accounts for about 4 days' work, I guess. What that consists of is about 7 bags full of shavings of teak, and these were produced by the planer. Somewhere between 600 and 700 metres of caulking, which was pulled up. About 1,000 screws, or a bucket weighing about 5 kilograms of screws and bungs. And then in total there was probably about 6 of these yellow buckets worth of the teak strips. Now note, these aren't the full planks. These are just the remainder of the teak decking once it had been planed back to a veneer of about 1 to 2 millimetres. So these are actually quite thin. So there we go, that's the deconstructed 352 Hallberg-Rassy teak deck after about 4 days of removal. I started out using a plug cutter to cut around the perimeter of the bungs to make the bungs easier to remove. But I noticed that after a while the plug cutter started to get a little bit blunt and wasn't cutting as well as it did. It was quite difficult to sharpen and to restore the edge of the blade, so in the end I swapped that out for a hole saw instead. The hole saw is a lot more robust and didn't lose the sharpness of the serrated blades at any point in the process. The advantage of this was, rather than having to dig out the bungs, Using the hole saw meant that the entire bung and the surrounding material came out easily, quite often in one attempt with a screwdriver and a mallet. Now the reason I use this approach is that many of these bungs had been taken up, the screws replaced, and then glued back with either varnish or some sort of adhesive. So they weren't coming out nicely. This way was much easier because the entire bung and surrounding material came out, and quite often in one go with a screwdriver and a mallet these popped out. Next I pulled up all the caulking because I wanted to save the planer, though in the end I don't think it really had much difference to the planer once I was using the second set of blades, which were much better quality. They seemed to rip through everything without any problems, so perhaps you could leave the caulking in. The thing I found out about the planer is, first of all, you need a really good sturdy motor. So I had this Triton, which is about 1400 watts, and you definitely need something this strong to deal with the teak, particularly cutting down to a depth of 3mm at a go. On average, it took between 2 to 3 swipes with the planer to get most of the teak off down to leaving a depth of 1 or 2 millimeters, which could then be lifted up afterwards. So apart from having a really strong planer, the second most important thing is to invest in really good blades. I found the blades that came with the Triton planer lost their sharpness after a few hours, and I noticed that I was having to swipe 5 or 6 times before I could get most of the teak off. So once I changed the blades over with hardened steel ones, I found that one set of these lasted the whole 4 days and didn't need to be changed over at all. So I'd really invest in making sure that you get decent blades and not necessarily the blades that come with the planer, because I guess they're not as high quality as you could get. Finally, when it came time to remove the remaining piece of teak off the deck, the best approach for this was to use a scraper blade piece on a oscillating tool. Now occasionally this needed a little bit of heat with a heat gun where the adhesive was really thickly laid, but more often than not this cut through the adhesive and wedged itself nicely between the deck and the teak and was able to sort of break up that adhesive bond pretty nicely. And the result of that is that all this teak came off without leaving much of a mess behind. Most of the gel coat was intact, even in places where it was severely cracked. Okay, so that was about an hour's work to get all of that up. And here's the strips here. So the good thing about this process, as you saw before, is you can really take the teak off in big strips. So these are, 3 to 4 feet long. And you'll see when I come back and clean this up that most of the gel coat is intact. There's very few places where it's pulled up some gel coat and left the substrate raw. And where it has done that, it's places where the gel coat is severely cracked and chipped due to water ingress. So the end result is a nice smooth deck. Okay, so this is the last piece of the teak decking to come off, and this is actually also the last piece of the cap rail to come off. As you can see, I've got all the cap rail off, I've got all the teak decking off. So I just need to work on this piece today. I need to take off this pulpit, bow pulpit, and then this cap rail, or what's left of the cap rail, and then I can take this final piece of teak decking off. Okay, so to do this, I've got some hardware to take off, cleat there, anchor roller there, the remaining bolts of what was a cleat here, then undo these holding screws here for this whole bow pulpit to come off, and then I can get the screws out of this cap rail, get some heat onto it, and hopefully leverage it off. So this is the anchor well up the front here, which is in a little bit of a state. This was a bracket to hold the gas bottle in place, which is all just rotten wood. A lot of rust stains. And it's quite a tight, confined space to work in. But I've got to get under here so that I can get the backing plates and nuts off the bolts that is holding these cleats and other hardware on. So that's what I'm doing now. Okay, so I've taken as much of the deck hardware off as I can around this pulpit area and cap rail. I've left the pulpit on for the time being because it's providing a little bit of protection and safety when I'm working in this area, but I'll have to take it off soon. I'll leave this on for now, and I'll start to drill out all these screws, or drill around the bungs of all these screws on the cap rail. And then once I've done all that drilling, then I'll take off this push bit, and I'll show you why. As you can see here, I've got this bolt that's going through the deck that's holding on this anchor roller, and this anchor roller is actually welded to the forestay tang, which goes down and is 3 bolted. Yeah, is bolted through the bow here. So these are the nuts on the other side. So to take this piece of cap rail off, I need to remove this bow roller, which is attached to the forestay tang. So I'll do that last because I want to keep this push bit here as long as possible. The push bit is bolted onto the forestay tang there. Yep, so I'll go and drill these bungs out now. Once I've done all that drilling, then I'll take the push pit out, and then finally I'll undo the forestay tang. I guess it's really a forestay chain plate. Not sure what the correct term is for that. If anybody knows, please feel free to add a comment. Well, I've spent most of the day wedged in this anchor well, which has actually been quite a good place to hang out because it's quite secure. Because I've taken down the pulpit, and also the fact that there's no lifelines here anymore, means it's a little bit precarious working right on the end, so it's actually been quite good to be able to wedge in here and do some work. So I'll show you what I've done. Okay, as you can see, I've taken down the bow pulpit, and I've also taken the last of that cap rail off that was under the pulpit around here. It's again really weird. On the starboard sides, underneath the cap rail, the material used to sort of bed it down was really hard and compact, like a sort of adhesive cement. And on the starboard side, it was just this black sort of polysulfide, silicon filler, which is a lot more flexible. And that's what I noticed all the way along this side. The cap rail was a lot easier to get off, and it had this black kind of almost like a caulking compound. I guess it's just polysulfide. And then on this side all the way back, it's just like really hard, compact sort of adhesive. The other thing that's a little bit unusual, I sort of cleaned this up a little bit and got rid of most of the residue of the
sealant on one side and adhesive on the other. There's a kind of like circular disc here, and another one here. So I'm wondering whether this might have been like an anchor point to lift the deck when the deck was mounted to the hull. I've seen before that they've got, like, you know, chains and anchor points where they lift these up and move them around. Maybe that's what this was for. Maybe it's a plug when it comes out of the mould to pick it up from that point. So yeah, there's a lot of work to do to this cap rail now, but I just need to focus on getting all of the teak decking removed, and that's what's going on here. I've just got this last little bit to do to get rid of around the anchor well, and then that will be it. I can go home.